Hey, we are back with the second and concluding episode of creating roles and responsibility for Laravel API. In the first episode, we had discussed about the method creating roles and permissions using a package named Entrust. We had associated permissions to each roles which we had defined. We also had created a test user for which we will attach a role in this tutorial. So let's get started. What I'm going to do right now is to create a method which we will use to attach a role to a user. So let's call it attach user role. I'm going to make the method type to be get in this case, just so that you can check out how a get route will work in this case. So attach user role will accept parameters user ID and the role name. We had defined different role names in the previous tutorial, like owner. So I'm fetching the user based on a user ID, and the Laravel Entrust will allow us to have something called as the roles through the user object. So this is one of the features of Entrust. We can get the role ID based on the ID associated, like using the find. That is one way of doing it. And if everything is succeeded, then we can return the user. So in this case, we are passing role name as the parameter. So we have to modify it to a where based on the role name, we will get the role associated with it. So we have to, let me just check whether the name, it should be name. So where based on the name, we pass the role name and get the first object. So that will return the role. So I'm modifying the method here. This is a route which we are associating for that particular method. As I said, it should be a get. So if it is get, I am passing the parameters as user ID and then passing the name of the role. So my method name is attach user role. So we have created the route. And let me see whether the route is properly defined. So for that, you just need to run API routes and it'll show you all the routes available. So to run it in the console or in the browser, let's copy paste. It being a get call, we can directly run execute it in the browser itself. So I'll replace the user ID with the ID, any of the IDs which I have created. Let's say one, and the name should be something like owner, which I had defined. So I'm associating owner role to user one. So everything is successful and it returned that particular user. So let's check whether that role is associated to the user now. So let's go and check in the role user table. And you can see that the entry has been made for that particular user. So our route worked fine. So that is the way you execute a get method using a route. So let's do something like get user role, which will fetch the role associated, all the roles associated with pertaining to our user. So in this case, we have created a role for user ID 1. So I'm just passing that user ID, fetching that user, and I can just directly call roles. This is my third route, get user role. That should ideally be roles, so I make a change. So if I run it, you can see that the roles associated with that user is returned, which is product owner. So that works fine now. Let's create another method which will attach the permission so this one I'll create as a post method. So in Laravel 5.1, a post method parameters can be accepted using a request object. So for getting the parameters, I can call that request and only pass those parameters which I require. So in this case, I'm asking for the permission, which is one of the parameters, and the role. So what I'm trying to do here is fetch the permission and the role and then associate that permission to that particular role. So in the parameters, I accept it. And the next step is to create the accept the variable in a permission variable. So the parameter is accepted in a permission variable and a role variable. So that's pretty much obvious. So I'm just modifying it as params. And I'm trying to get the role based on the role param which is passed, and I'll access the first object which is returned. And I am getting the permission entry from the table based on the condition where the permission name, I'll pass it as a where condition, and then I'll pass the permission param and access the first object which is returned from the array. So I have accessed the role and the permission based on the params passed. The next step is to associate or attach the permission to the role. So with Entrust, we have a method called attach permission, which you can directly access through the role and then attach that particular permission. So on success, let's return the permissions through the role. So it will only return the permissions associated with that role. Do some little documentation, then let's create the route associated with it. So in this case, it is a post method. So let's make it as post, have it as a role, the param. Actually, I don't need a param because this being a post method, we directly can, or we can pass it as a body to the body. So permissions and add. My method is attach permission. So let me just show you a little trick with helpers, which is a trait coming along with the Dingo framework. So if you have it in your base class controller, you can call something like this instance. You can respond using a response method and call something as created. So this will return a 201 response when the item is inserted to database. So this is, let's do this, create admin permission for an owner. So you can see that the object is created and the return response is 201. So this is one of the features of using Dingo framework, where it gives you a trait like helper which can be included to extend the behaviors associated. So we can see that the permission associated with the role. Let's try fetching that permission associated with the role. So get call a get method, get permissions, pass the role, and let's better pass it as a role param, and then it's a name. We're passing the role name and try to fetch the role object. A where will always return an array, so you'll have to call the first and get the permission. So there's a method called perms through which you can access the permission associated with the role. I like documenting my code because at a later point when I revisit the code, I might not have clarity of what I had done. So we have the get permissions method. Let's create the route associated to it. So it's a get method, roles, and through that the permissions. So that's my route. Let's execute that. So it returns all the permissions associated with the role of owner. Different roles like edit invoice, delete invoice, create invoice, etc. Let me also show you what Dingo framework can do in returning. So again, we can respond with a response method called array and pass the array object through this. Advantages being you can associate let's say status code along with it. So that is something which we can look at in the next tutorial, where we'll see how we can respond in different ways. Thank you so much for the comments and feedbacks which are coming along. Hope this concluding part of the episodes on roles and permissions was interesting. Send across your comments and keep subscribed. Hope to see you soon with the next one. Happy learning.